When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All the Things podcast. This episode is going to be an interview one. We'll be chatting with Colby. You've probably seen his courses and guides on his website, spacejelly.dev, or even caught him on YouTube, where he creates and shares coding tutorials and coverage of web dev topics, such as the WordPress drama that ensued earlier last year. Recently, he has changed positions from the Director of Developer Experience Engineering at Cloudinary and transitioned over to Shopify as a senior engineer. Today, we'll be discussing the popular option, meaning the pressure that you feel, or maybe not, to choose the most or very close to the most popular option when shopping for developer tooling. Are the most popular options the most insulated from a platform upset, shutdown, or shakeup? Let's cut to the interview to find out. Alrighty, everybody, we have Colby on the line here. And before we jump into this loaded episode, Colby, what's up? How's it going? It's a new year. What have you been working on?
Hey, yeah, just kicking things off. Relatively new job, working in a completely new space. So excited, learning a ton and doing what I can to ship some awesome stuff to people.
Awesome. Hopefully, even though you sound like you're rather busy, you had like a good holiday season or a good holiday break anyway. Some sort of reprieve in there from the busyness.
Yeah, of course. Holidays are one of my favorite times of year, so loved getting to see the decorations and all that stuff. We recently found that one of the houses nearby us does one of those light shows.
Okay.
So we were like camp out in our cars outside, tune into the radio, and that was a lot of fun. But generally speaking, yeah, good holiday break. How about yourself?
No, it was a pretty good holiday break myself. I was just telling you before we aired that I had a whole bunch of work to do. And so I just sort of stacked my work hours right before Christmas started. And so I just kind of like delivered a whole bunch of stuff to a bunch of our clients so that they just had so much to chew on that I just didn't get talked to until probably this week in most cases. So
solid plan.
Yeah, it was a solid plan. It worked. And hey, I was chill because it's like there's literally nothing on my to-do list other than wait right now. So, and in terms of lights, I know I drive my parents crazy, but I set up my parents' lights. And every year I add just a little more. And they're like, they're kind of like, no, like we just want a couple of like, strings of lights in the window or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but I also have this every year in one other box. It's like, I also bought this for you, but let's put this in your window. So yeah, this year was
always got to take it to up another level.
Every time. And this year it was the entire window array was all lit up. So
wow, nice. Solid.
So let's jump into the first little bit here. You and I actually originally started talking when sort of the WordPress drama kind of broke, and this episode is not going to like necessarily shy away from that, but it's not going to focus on that. But you and I kind of had a discussion on, just that there's a lot of tools for us to use, like WordPress being one tool for us to use, and by us I mean we're web developers, web designers, anything in that kind of sphere. And when you're researching one of these to use, there seems to be like a pressure, or at least to me, there seems to be like I almost want to call it like a peer pressure to use the most popular tool in the space, or maybe a close second. But even then, it's kind of like the close second is usually like, it doesn't feel good enough or something like that. So what are your thoughts on this? Because I feel like this is one of the reasons why something like the WordPress drama is so upsetting, because there are a lot of CMSs out there, right? There's a lot of CMS programs. There's a lot of like site builders, editors, the list goes on, headless, whatever. But WordPress, obviously it employs a lot of people, indirectly and directly. However, it being the most popular, I kind of feel that pressure. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally get what you mean. Like, there definitely is that sense of pressure, especially when something is so overwhelmingly popular, and like you can relate that to like the React space, right? Like, if what people go and say, "Why aren't you using React?" And there's a lot of compelling reasons to use a popular tool. I think WordPress is an interesting one because it is kind of in itself a little bit polarizing, even though the community is so huge in itself. People are on the other side of the spectrum and just try to find ways to put WordPress down, but it is really a solid solution. So having this kind of, turmoil in the community is a bit of a bummer, and a lot of unfortunate things are coming to the light. But from the pressure side of things, it's interesting. The pressure is sometimes for good reason. There's a reason. There's usually a good reason why the tools are so popular and so overwhelmingly so compared to other options. Usually that means that there's solid user developer experience, or a really reliable. That's obviously not always the case. Sometimes an influencer might push something and it might blow up for whatever reason, but usually there's some good reason behind that. Now, does that mean that you should always default to using that popular option? Not necessarily. I definitely always encourage people to try to see what options are available and try to see what might work the best for them. One of the reasons to use one of the popular options, like going back to React or something, is how big the communities around those tools are. Because especially if you're getting into something, if you're a beginner in the coding world, one thing that's really helpful is having a community and tons of content around something to help you get going if you're stuck. And that might not always be the case with the less popular options. Does that mean you shouldn't use them? No, but it's just another reason.
Well, and we can see too that there's this like constant, I don't know if it's like a fear or what it is. Like if we take a look outside of the web developer space, even just like with apps, like mobile apps on phones or just like apps on the computer, it feels like ever since the internet became popular and updating apps became very easy, there's like this constant need for like, hey, is that still supported? And you're like, well, I mean, maybe no, but like how many years, like before the internet was like super popular, let's just say even like 2010 and below, which I mean, the internet was popular in 2010. There was a lot of programs where people were running them for, say 7 years, and it was no longer being updated. Like that was a completed product. And now the fear always is like, hey, is that thing supported? And that is legitimate. Like it is a legitimate fear, especially if you're running this huge code base, and to migrate away because it's no longer updated is kind of scary. Like what's your thoughts on that, maybe? Like in terms of that, like how worried would you be for something to be like supported moving forward, and how like do you think that plays a part in this sort of like pressure that we feel to use the biggest tool?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I think the community has sort of lost the idea of something that being able to be feature complete. And, feature complete is also a little bit different than support, right? Where feature complete might be they don't want to add something new, or something is completely fixed with the solution they came up with, so there's not any need to continue working on it. But then maybe the dependency breaks that maybe a new React version creates issues with whatever it is, and that makes the package have issues. So that's a more of a support issue. And I think there is fundamentally though some kind of sense of wanting to make sure that the maintainer or somebody is keeping an eye on that. Are they making sure to check with the latest versions? And that doesn't necessarily mean the maintainer they have to, what's the word? Like it's not a requirement, because for all purposes, like they can put out their code. Open source doesn't mean that they have to actively maintain that for the lifetime. Some people do that out of goodwill, which is amazing. A lot of amazing open source contributors in the world, but not everybody has to do that. But that's when you fork it. That's when you try to take it in your own hands. That's when you can make sure and do your own testing, making sure that it is working with your solutions and making sure there's no security issues. It's open source. So at that point, you can really take it in your own hands and kind of review and see where it's at.
Well, like, and based on that, I see a lot of people when they do a review of software. Like I've been requested personally, like I used to work in IT, and I've been requested personally by managers or by lead hands, whatever. They'll be like, hey man, tech leads, they'll be like, hey, can you, kind of give us an assessment of like, the top 5 softwares, the top 3 softwares, the top 5 solutions, whatever it is for the task at hand. And like, kind of like really, kind of begs the question of like, if I'm going through, CMS, in the web dev space, it's like there are a heck of a lot of options out there, but even just right now, like I feel like WordPress would be on top of the list. drama or not. And I want to be clear to the audience. I'm not saying WordPress is, in trouble of this disappearing tomorrow or anything like that. But in the hypothetical that the drama was worse, it might still top the list. So when those kind of reports or reviews go to a tech lead or a manager or something like that across all these different companies, like right beyond my little scenario that I just laid out, like that sort of popularity like perpetuates. So like, what do you think, Colby? Like, do you think that devs should actually be choosing the most popular option to sort of continually, I guess, build that community and be like, hey, you know what? Like my company is, 10 devs and a whole bunch of other employees. We're going to join this community that is, WordPress, or, enter in any other software here. Like could be anything from financial software through like some niche little like embedded programming thing. Like, do you think that we should be actually perpetuating and choosing the popular option? Or do you think that we should actually be trying to give some, credit to the other guys? Like, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also an interesting one, kind of bringing the company culture into it. I'll give you an example. So one of the companies that I used to work at, is called ThinkGeek, is a niche e-commerce company. And the team that managed the front end was largely me, another coworker, and then our manager. Now, when I was rebuilding their mobile checkout, I was trying to look for more dynamic. This is like almost 7 to 10 years ago or something like that. And at this point in time, I was looking for something more dynamic to build the UI with, something JavaScript based. And I was looking at things like handlebars, and React was pretty early, if I remember correctly, at that time. And I was still learning it myself. But, React seemed like it would be such an amazing option. It was new, shiny, I could use it. But I somewhat knew that I was already on the way out. And on top of that, nobody else on the team knew React. They didn't know what it was really even. So like trying to think about what kind of solution I could use that's not going to put a ton of weight on the rest of my team to try to be able to maintain that, whether or not I'm there or not, whether I'm leading or not, that's going to create a lot of cost for people trying to spin up on something. They have no idea what it does. So we ended up going with handlebars, I think, to create it, and some jQuery, intermixed with that. So it's trying to figure out what that balance is going to be. Now, for some bigger teams, maybe for like 10 plus, like if you get the buy-in with the rest of the team, like I think you have a little bit more flexibility, whether you're going to use React or you're going to use Vue or whatever it is. So you can make sure that the whole team is buying into that. The whole team's going to learn that. That way you're not going to, lead the team and all of a sudden everybody's going to not know what to do because they don't know how to use any of the code that you just wrote. So I think it's really situation dependent. I think once you kind of get to those areas though, going with the popular option does have a lot of benefits, especially with some of the larger organizations, because at that point you kind of have two takes on this. On one hand, maybe you have more resources to dedicate to fixing those issues for the smaller issues. On the other hand, if you are a larger solution, you probably have gone through a lot of that rigorous auditing and security issues that a lot of the other large organizations are using. So it's probably going to be a little bit more tried and, something that you could trust a little bit more natively than the other smaller solutions. So unfortunately, I don't think it's a one size fit all solution. Sometimes it does lean that way for the popular option. I think, probably more times than not, but that doesn't mean that it's always the right case.
That's always the struggle, right? Is like there's the shiny new tool that either is or is promising to soon deliver like the exact sort of feature or thing that you want. And then there's also the thought of like, in your case, it's like, hey, I'm kind of on my way out. Or for other people, it would be like, hey, I have longevity to think about here, where if I were to leave or if there were a support request, I don't want to be the only one that can answer that, right? Like, I don't want to be the only one that's like every single time there's something wrong with the UI of the mobile checkout, I think you mentioned. It's like, I don't want to be it's like, oh, that's a React problem, bug Colby by Colby. It's like, no, like bug the other guy, he's on call, or the situation is, right? So like that company culture, like absolutely plays a part in the selection process for sure.
Totally. And like kind of thinking about it also, even if you're just like an individual contractor working with some company, like building their marketing website or something like that, still kind of thinking about if you're using one of those smaller options, you might have to keep like patching things that just don't exist yet, or like, working around along the rough edges. And if you're just trying to ship something reliable, aside from your own personal experimentation, like that might cause a lot of headache for you. Whereas you could be spending your time on your own on a separate project of your own, learning those things, but using that kind of popular option, that tool that is going to be reliable for your client work, just to kind of save that headache.
And we actually do see that a lot right now in the WordPress space, where there's a lot of sort of, I would say, faith in the WordPress ecosystem of things, if you do things kind of the traditional way or the popular way, it's very stable now. Like I see a lot of people, because I think I was complaining on X or something like that sometime last year about how, like, you know, you're still one click away in WordPress from hitting that white screen of death. And like if a client or someone who's non-technical hits that, it's like you're getting that phone call, obviously, right? Because how else do you recover? But like so many people like responded, or I saw some other threads, and people were saying like, no, like they're like, we're either borderline or we're actually leaving, you know, auto updates, dare I say, on for plugins, which to me is like, whoa, like what's going on here? Like even I still won't do that. But it's like clearly like when you use like the sort of, I guess you can call them WordPress stacks of like, you know, certain very popular plugins, things have become so stable. Whereas when you go to like Band-Aid, like you're kind of saying, like Band-Aid, like write these little custom solutions, like, oh, I need a Band-Aid here, a Band-Aid there. Now, like the stability kind of problems and the nicheness of React, let's say, in your particular case, like back at ThinkGeek, like those kind of like niche problems then kind of like rear their ugly head, unfortunately.
For sure. And like you can even think about it right inside the WordPress ecosystem itself. For a while, I was doing a lot of headless WordPress work with WP GraphQL, and it's a fantastic tool. It works really well, and it gives you a lot more flexibility for building your UIs in something like React. But it wasn't completely, there wasn't a one-to-one support for like all the WordPress features. So like if somebody is used to the whole WordPress ecosystem for installing plugins, being able to do all that stuff, it's not always natively supported. I think some of the more popular ones are like, you know, Yoast SEO and whatnot, but not all of them are. And then you also still hit some of those rough edges. Like I remember like, you know, post previews aren't built in. So you have to completely think of a new solution around that. And there's just all those rough edges. Maybe you're going to get a lot more power out of it, but then you're going to be sacrificing some of that other stuff, where if you just went the traditional WordPress native stack, it's, you know, it all kind of just works. But, you know, there's always those trade-offs.
And you made me just think of something here, like this is, you know, kind of off the, like they're not, this is something I was going to originally ask in the show notes, but it made me think of something that Mike and I have discussed a lot, kind of like here and there throughout the show's life. And that is that, like, one thing that I really strive for when I'm giving a client kind of keys to the castle, if you will, mainly editing the site, is I try to make the UX for them really, really easy. Like I try to make things like, you know, fill in the blank, if you will. So I won't just say to them, hey, you know, here's like three post types in WordPress, and they're just like the sort of standard like title, maybe a URL editor, and then like the rich text. And I'm like, hey, like, you know, kind of have at it. Instead, I know that like the pages that they're trying to put together, for example, are very specifically laid out. And so it's like, you know, section 1, that's one text box. Section 2 or section 1 description is another text box, and the list goes on, right? Buttons and toggles and things, where the only mistake that they can make, hopefully, or as close to the only mistake they can make, is like they accidentally write the wrong content, make a typo or something. I don't want them to accidentally like delete, you know, the template of the page that I set up in the rich text file because they just like, you know, Control-A delete one day type thing. What's your thoughts on that? Because Mike and I have had in the past, we've set up the UX that was actually bad for us, where we were like, oh, this is a project for us. It's not going to a client. We'll be kind of like lazy and just kind of like, you know, throw this thing together, and then it'll be a WordPress site, sure. But whenever we publish content, remember to go in and like change this file in FTP or something. This was years ago. And then we end up not even updating the site properly because it's like, we don't even want to have that UX in the background, right? So like, what's your thoughts on that, of like, kind of like really kind of delivering like a good UX to whomever it is that's going to be using it?
I think that's super important. Now, you know, of course, depending on the deal that you have with your client, you know, maybe the amount of time you spent might be more worth focusing on the actual project itself. But I always think that it should kind of be padded in, if you can, to deliver as good of a UX as you can, because that's, you know, more attention to detail that's going to help them out. That's going to leave a better impression for you in the future. And I fully support having guide, you know, kind of like the guide rails for, you know, admin kind of level UX to make sure that somebody can get what they need to do to get done, but still not accidentally trip over things that might not be so obvious for them. I think it is important to also have the escape hatches, but in a way that, you know, this is a scary button. Don't hit this unless you know what you're doing. Because, you know, you never know if your client's going to be completely technical, or, you know, sometimes if you talk to them, but, you know, some clients are technical, some are non-technical and might not know what they're doing. Some might be slightly technical, think they know what they're doing, you know, so you never know who you're kind of working with, and being able to have those guide rails with additional support if they need it, I think it is definitely critical.
I'm a proponent of helper text. That's what I always tell people is the very first call, someone goes like, what does hide and show like header mean? I'm like, okay, do you know what a header is? No. It's like, okay, I'm writing down here, top of page will hide and show if you hit this button, you know?
Yeah. And, in the past, like I've also created videos, just really simple videos for people, kind of walking them through how to do things. And like, it doesn't need to be like, YouTube level production or whatever it is, it just could be a simple quick time with your voice on it, just showing them how to work through something. It can make a huge difference for them if they're feeling lost and not sure what to do. It's just going to add more comfort for them as they consider you for the next project as well.
Funny enough, I actually just started doing that for some clients because some people will pay us for training. If someone is like, if there's a company out there that does just straight up doesn't have a website, or their website, and in one case we changed one out that was, I want to say it was 15 or 20 or something like that. We had like an episode actually talking about it last year, and like obviously like they needed training. It's like the tools they're using are so antiquated. Like I went in there to try to edit it, and I was like, I don't know how to change like the title of the main page, so like I'm building you something new. And you're right, like 100%. Like it's almost like I'm making little short, not really, high production quality YouTube or even like TikTok length videos of just like, this is how you like publish stuff. This is that and this is that. And I could see the views of like them just like quickly going into the software and just quickly going in and being like, okay, yep, check this, check that, check this. And you could tell that they're like, how do you publish again? Instead of calling me, they just go and quickly check the video. And it's like, yeah. And I'm not trying to always avoid the call, but it's more convenient for them because if they're editing at 4 a.m. or something like that, I'm not going to answer the phone, right? So like they
Right.
have that option to do that anytime they want.
For sure. And then they can save that call for something more important. But, anything that we can do to remove that friction for our customers or clients, is critical.
100%, 100%. And you actually mentioned, so you're a content creator yourself. You had mentioned that you make some videos for, clients and that, but you do have a YouTube channel as well. And we've been talking about popular tools. And so I kind of want to talk to you about the content creator angle there. And so popular tools are obviously going to be, popular tools. And so do you think that, it's crucial to specifically cover the popular tools when you're making content? And that includes written guides, that includes videos, things like that. Like, do you think that you need to shy away, or should you shy away from more niche tools? Because obviously as a niche, it's a more niche audience.
Yeah, I like to personally kind of do a mix of both. I think usually the more popular tools will provide better traffic because, more people are searching for them inherently, but that's also going to mean that more people are creating video content around it. But I think that, depending on what it is, I still kind of like to teach people what options there are. And I might not necessarily go about it to say, I'm going to teach all the different options for analytics or something like that. But, another kind of approach I take is when I'm learning something because I want to implement it, then I go around and turn about it. So one example of that was plausible analytics. So I was implementing that on my site because it's the option that I ended up choosing when I was trying to research which I wanted to go when I was moving off of Google Analytics. So I thought I'm going to create a video on that. And, it's not nearly as popular as Google Analytics is. That's probably would be a better video for me to create as far as traffic goes. But it provided a lot of value for people who wanted to learn about plausible and an alternative to Google Analytics. So, I think, having a mix of that content also kind of keeps you sharp to kind of understand what those options are for your own work. But I don't know, I think it's fun exploring new tools. That's part of what I like about doing the content. And whenever I have an opportunity to show something that I find compelling, whether it is the popular option or not, I try to showcase that.
And so when you say that, it sounds like you are trying to do things a little more organically and you're not trying to chase the algorithm. And that's something that a lot of content creators will strive for. It almost becomes their job to go for the algorithm rather than make the content. And I get it. It's like some of these YouTubers are, if they're doing like crazy challenges or something, it's like, I'm going to build a $200,000 motorbike and like do this. And it's like, yeah, but motorbikes don't rank. It's like, well then, great. Like, great, fantastic. 200,000 doesn't rank. Fantastic. Do you think, like, because I know that you said that you like using the niche tools and you like using the things that aren't necessarily the biggest, search, let's say. Do you chase the algorithm at all? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't really chase the algorithm too much. And, that's probably why I haven't had like exponential growth compared to some of the other creators. But, I'm kind of doing it for fun. I'm doing it to help people learn the different tools. Part of it, I also have to kind of be interested in what I'm teaching, and like chasing the algorithm is kind of just going to burn me out really quickly. So I like to make sure that it's something that I'm going to be like genuinely interested in when I'm trying to teach it, because that's going to encourage me and provide more motivation to, first of all, learn it if I'm not already learning it for another purpose, then trying to build a project around it so that I can share it, and then ultimately, record it. So having that motivation and genuine interest is probably the most critical part of it for me. And I think the only kind of chasing that I do is like if I'm just trying to look for inspiration, I try to look for like more so up and coming tools. So, trying to see what people are talking about in the community. And if something is, something a lot of people seem to really genuinely love, maybe not necessarily it's exploded yet, but something people really love, then I might check it out, see if it seems like something interesting to me. And then if it is, then I'll make a video on it.
Do you find that that's a bit of a two-way street? So like if you, let's say, you see something on X or something like that you've never used, and someone suggests it, or they're raving about it, they love it, like this is the greatest form manager ever, like best form manager for, I don't know, WordPress or whatever. And you're like, you know what, I'll give that a try and I'll make some content about that. When you approach a tool from the content creator perspective, do you find that influences your day to day? Like, would you say, you know what, I'll try, what's a popular point? Gravity Forms. Sure. I'll try Gravity Forms for the very first time and I love it, right? You make the video and you're like, that's really good. Would you start using that in your day to day? Like, do you find that influence to be a bit of a two-way street at all?
I definitely think it would be, because immediately if I, run into a problem that I already know a solution for, I'll definitely see if it'll be a good fit. I'm not going to try to force that as the solution. But if I, like, for instance, I'm using Plausible on all my properties, and part of that is because you pay for one for multiple sites. But like if there was something else that I was implementing, I created like a little calendar widget, or I don't know, one of the many React videos I did. Like if I already have a solution in mind for it, like I'm just going to try to see if that's going to be a good solution for what I'm currently working on. But again, like you always got to make sure you understand the trade-offs. If I worked in that tool already, I should know the trade-offs and know whether or not it's going to be a good solution. But I still try to do my homework when I can. I try to be a good, what is it called? Whatever. I try to be good at making sure that I'm choosing the right thing for the right tool for the right job. And part of that's just making sure you do a little bit of homework. But sometimes the thing that you already know just works, and you already know it's going to be a good solution because of your experience with it.
Well, I know that, like me personally, I'm a big proponent, said it on the show like a million times, that I'm a proponent of using the correct tool for the correct job, because I know that a lot of people will try to use, like, I mean, we've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it too, where someone will have like this tiny little site that's, 2 small pages away from just being a landing page, and they have like an enterprise CMS connected to it. And they're like, why is it laggy? Why isn't it performing well? It's like, I don't even know how to log in, man. Like, I'm going to have to take a day, because it's enterprise CMS are usually pretty messy. Like, it's not like edit page. Yeah. It's usually like edit quarter. It's like edit quarter. Am I doing like my finances? Like what's a quarter? And it's like, please learn all our verbiage and all our like nouns that we've like randomly created. It's like, okay, here we go. Just to change one paragraph. Fantastic.
Right. For sure. Yeah. And it's definitely a level of complexity that you really need to kind of pay attention to. The enterprise level CMS, like the one thing about having a CMS, probably not an enterprise level CMS, but like having even just some kind of simple dashboard, going back to the client work, like that'll remove the friction from them. But you got to make sure that you're trading it off with something that's, first of all, not going to cost them, because the enterprise level CMS is going to cost a lot. So making sure your client kind of understands that there could be better, simpler options, and, just providing generally that better UX.
Yeah, so like on that kind of topic of like, kind of providing that better UX, oftentimes your client's going to come to you with like a niche problem. So the enterprise CMS problem on a landing page or whatever, and I'm going to kind of call these a niche problem, right? And so when given a niche problem, you'll commonly only have niche solutions. So we've talked a lot about, using the top tool, using, maybe a popular but not the top tool. What do you think on those niche issues? So for example, to clarify what I'm saying is, if you're seeking out a very specific solution on a WordPress site, you'll often find only a random, very small plugin made by maybe a solo dev that does exactly what you want. So in this context, you're kind of forced into using this niche plugin, or of course, you could create your own custom solution, but then effectively you are becoming the solo dev of a plugin, whether it's publicly available or not. So like, what do you think about that? Like, how do you handle like such a such a niche solution. And like I think it would be maybe even different in the context of if you're employed by the person, then sure, they're probably paying you for actually supporting it, like creating it and supporting it initially. But if you're doing a client kind of project where you're an agency and it's like, after this project I may never see or hear from this person again, how do you handle like that sort of like more niche solution?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think there's a kind of different ways to look at it. Probably the right answer is, if you're finding that your solution is that niche, is it possible that you might be looking at it, like maybe looking at it in a different way can make you realize that you're trying to solve a problem that may not need to be solved? Like maybe you're trying to force something, and maybe if you just kind of think about it from a different approach, you might come to maybe a simpler solution, something that might be more on the common code path. But there's always going to be those instances where you have that real niche issue, and it's hard to find answers around it. Like one of the SDKs that I was managing for Cloudinary, my last company, I built this library that I was using PNPM and a mono repo. And then once I had most of that done, I found out that along with a package I was using for releases called Semantic Release didn't have real mono repo support. So I had to install a plugin on top of that, which, made it work some of the way, but it had a lot of conflicts with PNPM and that mono repo support and Semantic Release. So I was running into a lot of issues. Now I found a plugin that I would be able to use to provide that support, but turns out that it's been a couple of years since they updated it. I created an issue. I created a pull request to try to get something fixed on it, but they were just nowhere to be found on that repo. So I ended up forking it in this situation. I made the patches that I needed to make. I shipped it on NPM and I started using that for the package. Now, was that the right answer? Because I had invested so much time into that solution, it felt like that little bit extra to support that niche plugin that I wasn't really going to update too much after that would have worked just fine. Now, maybe if I look back, I could have figured out a different tool for either the mono repo support or for the release manager, something that would have that native PNPM and mono repo support. But, it's all about making that trade-off. Like, is that niche solution going to be something that could come back and bite me, a year or two down the road? Or is that something that, maybe it's going to be this one-time patch and then forever it's going to work, that I could focus on the actual problems that I'm trying to solve? So I think it's really just all about those trade-offs.
That's kind of, I guess, what we do when we do the research originally. Like we talked in the beginning of the episode about kind of researching the specific solution to, your lead hand or whatever, asks you to do something, asks you to research something. And that is kind of what you're doing, is you're kind of weighing the trade-offs of like, is this going to be supported in this particular case? Is this going to be supported? Do I have to fork it as you did? And, kind of do that type of thing. Like in your case, like you kind of took matters into your own hands and you're like, all right, this person's not answering, this dev's not answering. I'm just going to go do it myself. And like for a lot of people, especially those like kind of on an agency timeline, like for their situation, like they wouldn't be able to do that. It's like, hey, we got another job on, like we gotta get moving on, and that type of thing. Like, what's your kind of thoughts on that then? So like, I know that you said like sometimes like the niche thing that you're looking for isn't necessarily something that you need, and you should maybe assess that and be like, okay, like, is this something we can work around or just cut out of the project entirely? But if someone like a client is really kind of adamant on it, and they're not willing to pay for that extra thing, like what's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is hard to give like a straightforward answer on, because like in my mind, I lean to like, if they're not going to pay for that extra time, then you're probably going to want to try to go with something that's not going to potentially be a bunch of sunk cost. And that niche solution could be that potential ton of sunk costs. So kind of reassessing where you're at. And, even like from the point of the niche solution, it might not always be that you're trying to do something the wrong way, but I think of it from the perspective of like trying, like whenever I see support forums for like all the different frameworks and everything, people might be asking a question very specific to a problem that they're trying to solve, but it might turn out that the problem that they're trying to solve they're not asking the right questions to solve that. So if you actually kind of step up a higher level and think about the entire, with the context of the rest of the application, and then ask that question in that way, it might give somebody a way to kind of see that and say, actually, I think you're doing this in a slightly different way. And if you do this, it's going to make that whole solution kind of moot and be able to come up with an even better solution. So, I think kind of reassessing it from that context is also important. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's an interesting take, because like you're kind of like going back on the chain, like in like a business, they'll have like, a chain of their workflow or whatever. And let's say like we're on, step 9 of whatever workflow it is. Now we need a new niche solution. It's like, well, hang on, if we go back to step 6 and we actually send this email to this person instead, now we don't need a filter. And like this filter is the niche thing that we're stuck on. And that's an interesting take. Like and actually I do know a couple of people that went into that exact, like, I guess, work. I don't even know what you would call it, like that type of, because they were web developers and now they're productivity developers. I don't know, where that's what they do full time, where they like look up solutions for people, where they go, hey, whoa, like it's taking you, 4 hours to do your quote. Let's tear all that down. Let's like fix that, like that sort of like chain of events that gets you there. And I think it's healthy actually to look up that chain, and the reason why I mention that is because we get comments on some of our videos and some of our content that's just like, hey, you guys, like meaning Mike and I, will push back on the client a bunch. And that's like a way to push back, right? Is to say, hey, like change up how you're doing something. And we get told a lot of the time where it'll be like, hey man, like don't, like just do what you're told. Like just do step 9 in that workflow. When it's like, yeah, but I think the client might raise an eyebrow to me changing step 6. And then once they do it twice, I feel like they're just gonna do it because it's probably better. Right. And so it's like that back and forth of like, how much do you push the client toward your direction, and how much of that push and pull do you want?
For sure. And, I know some people get a little bit more leniency with their clients than others. So I don't want to make a blanket, recommendation and you end up losing your client or something like that. But I do think being in a position where you can show them the trade-offs, and if they don't want to pay for it, of course, you don't want that to come out of your pocket. So being able to show them the trade-offs, talk about the solution that you came up with where you both can be happy as far as time goes and actually delivering, I think that's really important to also show that you are trying to, make your best effort to solve that in a way that everybody can be happy.
100%. And client work is always like a bit of a crapshoot in that way, where it's kind of like, am I going to like anger the person here? Am I not? Right. What's great about being in an agency, just as a really brief aside, is that usually you'll have a repeat client, like someone who's like a serial entrepreneur or just has a big project. And so you'll work with them for a while once you kind of get established. And so like I have clients now where like I talk to them like as if I'm family, and like, well, they'll call me and it's not professional at all. It's like, what the F are you doing? Like, what the heck is this? And I'm like, what the F are you doing? You're messing the site up, right? It's like, I've worked with this person for 10 years. So it's like, it's less, it's like, hey, pay that invoice, Hey, and everyone's like on the phone all yelling and stuff. Not always like that. I'm just like obviously joking, but it's not, it becomes less formal and more of just like, we're both working toward the same goal, So our goals align basically.
And I would think most reasonable clients would understand that. And, especially for the fact that they don't want to spend the money, they, could probably empathize that you don't want to spend all that time and money on your own dime to get that. So coming up with a solution that makes everybody happy, I think, is usually the right path.
100%. And I kind of want to just like change gears slightly here and talk about, like, we've been talking about, agencies and a bit of my work as well. And so you, Colby, you are not only a content creator, which we've already discussed, but you also have sort of the professional 9 to 5. And I'm interested in, why do both? Like, and would you ever give up the 9 to 5? Like a lot of people who are in 9 to 5 want to do the content creator game, but then I see a lot of people in the content creator game go back to a 9 to 5, whether it's due to maybe an offer they can't refuse, because typically like the people who do that, the content is like, mega successful, and that they're doing fine. They're not exactly like, on their last paycheck or anything like that.
Yeah, I think the reason I do is just mostly because I enjoy creating the content so far, and hopefully that kind of keeps up that way. But I kind of enjoy learning things, learning new tools, sharing that with people. It's nice to be able to know that I'm helping somebody in some way and kind of maximizing my impact on other people's projects. And that just kind of keeps me motivated to want to keep doing it. It's been interesting because I took a content break since November, since I joined my new company, and trying to find that motivation again. But because part of it's like trying to figure out what the right timing is, when to make it, because 9 to 5 might mean that you're actually literally working 9 to 5. Otherwise, some people work at nights or whatever, and figuring out when you can actually create those videos. So, part of it is that motivation to want to create in the first place, but also trying to figure out practically when you're going to do that, especially juggling a lot of the other stuff in your life, right?
That's always the question of like, like I have this great, video idea, and I know that even if it's not like mega popular, because who knows what the algorithm and whatever else, I know that whoever watches this is going to get like a great solution. Like I've solved something, because you mentioned kind of like you're doing something in your professional life and you're like, hey, maybe I'll make a bit of content on that, like the switching from Google Analytics to another solution. And so it's like, hey, I know this would be great for anyone who's in the same boat. You sit down and you're like, I have an hour and I just got like my video editor open, and I've imported the title card, and it's like, I need some more time. Like I need more time to be able to create this proper.
Yeah. And one thing that I've learned throughout my time doing this is I've tried to optimize me recording a video as much as I possibly could, because, there's a lot, I have limited time every day. So if I don't do that, I'm going to be wasting time trying to figure out the AV equipment, figuring out how to open up the recorder and all that stuff. So being able to spend as little time as I can to, knock out recording that video and then ultimately editing it whatever time I edit it, just helps make it more likely that I will actually record. Just trying to smooth that out as much as possible, making sure I'm in something that's going to make me feel good about wanting to sit down and do it.
That's almost like going back to the UX conversation a little bit, where it's like, you're making sure that your UX of doing the content creation is good, because you don't want to be like, I have, look at the clock, I got 1 hour. Okay, well, like setting up for this podcast, setting up for this video is going to take 50 minutes. So I will not do that. But if it only takes 4 minutes, I mean, hey, you got 55-ish minutes. Maybe I can sneak a coffee in there in that 1 minute or whatever. And so like you're enhancing your own UX.
And I think a good example of this for me personally is the way that I usually record is like I build out the project ahead of time. And so that like when I go to record it, like I'm basically just walking through myself doing that. But if I forgot something about building the project, or if I wasn't as prepared as I was for other videos, I'd sit down and try to record it, and then I'd hit like an issue. And then I'm just sitting there trying to fix that issue for, can go from 5 minutes to 15 minutes to half an hour. And then at that point, I'm already half hour in it and I don't have anything to show for it. So it's like, making sure you're well prepared for it before you actually try to spend that time. And I don't know, everything you can do to help smooth out that process just makes it, that much more easier.
100%. I agree. Because we've definitely had episodes for sure where we've like written like the show notes weeks and weeks and weeks in advance. And, let's say it's a complex topic or something like that, or maybe not even complex, it's something specific. Like you're describing syntax. And I'll get like halfway through the episode and I'll like really mess something up, because like even though it's pre-recorded, you're just kind of like talking. And someone's just like, well, it's into the editor, select this 15-minute chunk, delete. Now, how do we transition this smoothly? I think a couple weeks ago, I was straight up talking about the wrong technology for one small part. And then I realized that like halfway through, and I was like, anyway, Mike, what are you up to this week? Like, just like completely, for whatever reason, ill prepared just for that one little part, or like forgot or whatever. So, but I kind of want to like just kind of conclude this episode a little bit with, I know that there's a lot of beginners that listen to this show, and we'll kind of recommend, and other people will recommend to them, hey, try to get your first job and, do your learnings and all this, but content creation plays a part in that sometimes, where it doesn't need to necessarily be videos and like these big blog posts or anything like that. But, blog posts absolutely plays a part, maybe posting on X or doing something to kind of like market yourself, So Colby, like tell me about your professional experiences and like how you landed them, because I'm sure the audience would be interested in that. And Jimmy, did your content creation play any part in that?
So I think, when I first started creating content, I was on a traditional engineering role. And after that is when I moved into DevRel. So it certainly did, because, a lot of DevRel work is around content. So it's kind of like needed for that, maybe, if you will. My job now at Shopify is going back into the traditional engineering, and I'm not really sure if it did help. I like to think it did. I like to think that it did. But generally speaking, I really encourage people to try to like build in public or write blog posts or whatever. I know not everybody has the time, not everybody is comfortable doing that. But one thing that it does, or even just building things on GitHub, one thing that it does is kind of give you that one leg up compared to the rest of the people applying. You might have, 100 people applying, or, whatever, 10, 100, whatever, people applying to a job that don't have a GitHub, that don't have any projects on GitHub. And you might be that one person that has something interesting on GitHub that the hiring manager can go in and actually look at. They might see your expertise. If nobody else has that, you're putting yourself one step above the rest of the people for how to get that. Now, going for like blog posts or talking about it on X or Blue Sky or whatever, again, you're just giving yourself a little bit more leverage for showcasing your expertise that other people might not be doing. So it's really just kind of making them comfortable with hiring somebody that they might know already knows how to do some of the work that they need.
And I kind of want to build off what you said there, because some people will get concerned in that with, like, obviously you said, like, not everyone's familiar or not everyone's comfortable with, sharing their thoughts and that type of thing. But I have kind of seen a sentiment lately where it's like, I'm worried my employer or prospective employer will think that I'm like super gung-ho all the time to do this. Like, I'm always going to update my blog. I'm always going to update my site. And the reason why they're hiring me is that, I'm everywhere. I'm running around. Like, I love web development, or I like, whatever type of development I'm doing. I like marketing, whatever. And I'm super into it all the time and go. And they're worried that once they pick up that 9 to 5, then like they're not going to be able to update their blog fast enough. And so I do see that as actually being like a discouraging part for some people, where I know this is kind of a niche issue, but I have seen it where they won't even touch the blog and they won't do those professional updates. And then they do struggle to kind of find those opportunities because they, I guess, have less marketing about themselves. Like, what would you say to that sort of issue and those people?
So one clarification, do you mean that because somebody who wants to create content just no longer has the time to create content? Is that what you mean?
That's right. Yeah. Like they're worried that by kind of like really updating a blog, let's say every day or every week or something, because they're maybe full-time learning or virtually full-time learning, they look like they're portraying themselves as someone who's like just like really into the industry. Like go. Like, I love this thing. I'm going to do this 24/7. Like, when I'm in bed, I'm reading about it. Whereas like when they get the job, it's like, maybe I'm not going to shut down the blog, but it might be like a monthly post. Like, and they're worried about that. Like, I know it's a bit of a niche issue, but it is something that I've seen a few times.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, if somebody is hiring you because of those kind of qualities, usually jobs will give you a little time to kind of poke around and try out this kind of things on your time. It's really job dependent, of course. But there's no reason like I couldn't spend a little time learning about something React related with a new release, something along those lines. And I think it's really also kind of going to that trade-off of the 9 to 5. How much do you want to keep creating that content? Was that content just to get a job, or is that something that you do want to continue doing because you have a passion around it? And, I guess unfortunately at that point, or fortunately because you just landed a job, like, you got to figure out that time. You got to prioritize your time. You got to see where you can fit that in around the rest of your time. And maybe that's not always possible, but I think, the trade-off was that you landed that job that you wanted to land. And I don't think there really should be an expectation on the employer that you're updating it unless it's part of your job. And if it's part of your job, they should make that clear. I don't think that if they don't bring it up, usually that means that it's not likely that it's, intended to be part of your job.
And I'm sure that's going to be comforting to hear for anyone that's concerned about that. Because we had a couple guys in college that, I don't know if they had this concern, but they had like a really like popular blog, and that's how they got hired. And then like that just went away, right? And it's sort of like I would imagine some people would be worried, like, hey, now your blog is dated. But you're 100% right. Like, that was almost like the rocket booster, if you will. They rocketed to a job, they dropped the rocket boosters, they now no longer do that blog, or they do it minimally. And now they keep going in their career trajectory. And I mean, no one's saying that they can't go back to the blog if they either want to or need to, if like their job closes down or something like that.
Yeah. And, I think getting back to the point, like, it's really job dependent, but like if your employer hired you because you have this awesome, popular, super updated blog, and they want you to continue maintaining that, the expectation should be that they're going to carve out that time for you to spend updating that blog, and that would be on the company time. So there really needs to be that expectation. If they bring it up at all, just make sure that you do have that conversation if you're uncomfortable with something, so that you both are kind of getting what you expect.
And that's, I think, a really key point, is a lot of people will just sort of like almost suffer in silence in that way, where it's like, oh, my boss is asking about my next blog post or something, like, if that's a thing. Maybe it's a content generation company or something, and it's like, man, I'm kind of worried about this. It's like, yeah, bring that up, like have that conversation and say like, yo, I'm a little concerned about this. Like, is this supposed to be company time? Is this not? if you expect this, like I'm going to need more compensation or I'm going to need some loo time or whatever it is, right? Like kind of work it out in a way that you're comfortable. And I think that is important, like rather than suffering in silence and kind of letting that resentment grow, I guess, if you will. This is not a psychiatrist show, so I promise.
Right. And, you know, I think like a lot of companies will be really open to having that conversation. I think the one traditional engineering company that I worked with prior to moving to DevRel, I started to do a lot of content when I was with them, and that benefits them. If I'm going out and giving talks with their name next to my name, or if I'm publishing blog posts where people can see that I'm working at their company, you know, that's only going to positively reflect on them. Of course, if people like the content, you know, but that's only going to positively reflect on that company and get more people looking at that company, which, you know, again, is beneficial for them. So making sure to have that conversation, making sure they see it that way. And again, just making sure you're both happy about where that's at.
100%. No, and I think that's a great way to sort of conclude this episode, because I know that a lot of people, like I said, are beginners listening to this, and they would be worried to, like, you know, like we said, drop the blog post or talk to their employer or, you know, suffer in silence and that type of thing. And like, it absolutely makes sense. Like if the company wants kind of that marketing of like you having a blog post or you having a talk and, you know, they had your logos beside them, like you're effectively working, right? And so you need to have that conversation and sort of like sort that out with your employer.
For sure. I just wanted to say, you know, like you can have that pressure, whether it's from your employer or yourself. Just make sure to be kind to yourself, because if you're doing this pressure just because you think that you need to have something out every single day, you know, maybe that's valid if you're trying to get that job. But, you know, once you do have that job, just make sure to be kind to yourself and make sure you're not putting too much pressure on you so you don't burn out quickly by trying to force that.
And if you force it to, like I've definitely done it, just as like an aside, is that I look back and I'm like, oh, don't look at that blog post. And I don't want that on my career all over the place where it's like all these like kind of like dark marks of like, oh, that's a bit of a dent. Oh, that's a bit of a scratch. Let's get these out of here. It's like, no, produce something that you would want to see in the future. Like this is my career, right? This is what I've written on my blog or my site or my video, my YouTube channel, things like that.
For sure.
So Colby, I think this has been a really great episode, but before we kind of conclude this interview, I'd like to, you know, kind of allow you to take the floor, plug whatever you want. Any links you'll share will be placed in the show notes on htmlallthethings.com. Please take it away.
Cool. I appreciate it. Yeah, I don't have anything like super current to plug specifically, but, you know, I have a ton of video content on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colby Fayock. You can find me at Twitter, Blue Sky, Colby Fayock. Well, Blue Sky is colbyfayock.com since I use my domain for that, but pretty much everywhere at Colby Fayock, you can find me.
Great. And like I said, I will put those links on htmlallthethings.com in the show notes so you can go and check out Colby's videos and follow him on the various socials. And thank you very much for being on this episode. I know that we spent some time putting it together and that type of thing, and I think it turned out really good. I hope you had a good time here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Michael, for setting this up. Great chatting with you.
Thank you. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that interview as much as we did, but unfortunately it is time to end, but not before thanking our $3 tier patrons. And you yourself can become a $3 tier patron or a Patreon, whatever, of another tier via patreon.com/HTML all the things. Now, who are these $3 tier patrons? Tim from The Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Mosteler from swoonworthydesigns.com. And last but not least, we'd like to give a shout out to a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com. Michael LaRocca is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.